Let's flip this over to him. Share screen. I think it's this. And did that work? Did that work? Did that work? Yes, that did work. Excellent.
Hi, Tamar.
How are you doing today? You doing all right?
Are we live?
We are live. Yes, we're live. Do not divulge any bad data. Do not say anything
Okay.
bad, anything like that.
Yes, I'm very good.
I'm glad you could join me, man. I really am. Thank you for this. And let me just check with the audience, make sure they can hear me okay. Guys, can
Thank
you?
you very much for inviting me.
Oh, sir, you're always welcome on this show. You're always welcome. I do have questions. I have questions, and you are the person that I would love to get those answers from. Donald Trump has been, and I'm going to say Israel also, they have been trying to downplay the amount of damage that they've accepted in the last 12-day war, as it's being called. Um, Iran has hit Mossad sites, they've hit air sites, they've hit Ben Gurion Airport, they've hit Haifa, they've hit the financial district, they've hit one military target after the next. The economy of Israel seized, basically stopped in its entirety. And Donald Trump, daddy, had to get involved to protect Israel when it became clear that Israel couldn't maintain and couldn't keep going in the conflict. Now, they can project something else, but that is true, what effectively took place. That's just reality of events. How does Iran view this? I mean, because, and I want to step into it, but from your take, how's Iran looking at this? The US is looking at this as if Iran was, quote unquote, beat to hell in the way that Trump would say it. And you have Netanyahu, who is apparently coming to Washington, D.C. to request, and I want to stress request, because there are a lot of people who act as if Israel is a rogue actor. They're not. They're pushed by the U.S. to request to resume operations against Iran. How does Iran view this?
There are a number of things that we should take into consideration. One is the fact that it wasn't Iran that requested a ceasefire. And it's not a ceasefire from the Iranian perspective, by the way. Iran has just accepted a halt in violence, a cessation of hostilities. Iran has said that if the Israeli regime does anything, we will hit back immediately and very hard. So where did the ceasefire request come from? It didn't come from Tehran. And if they were winning, why would they want to ceasefire? They're crazy. Why don't they just finish the job? Let's get it over with and get rid of the so-called regime, as they like to call it. So none of this makes any sense if we were to accept the Trump, Netanyahu, New York Times, Washington Post, Fox News narrative. And we have to keep in mind that the entire Western political establishment and the legacy media, they're all together when it comes to Iran. They may hate Trump over everything else, most of them, but when it comes to Iran, they are full allies. So if you read the Atlantic or the New York Times or the Washington Post, they're no different from Fox News when it comes to Iran. So you're not going to hear them say how successful Iran was or how Iran managed to get the upper hand, even though it faced a blitzkrieg attack, joint attack effectively, and that Trump and Netanyahu used everything in their arsenal. Remember, Jamal, what they give to Israel, the Israeli regime, Zelensky can only dream about. They give the regime everything. There's nothing that the regime could ask for that they would not give it to them.
Daddy provides.
Exactly. And the Israeli regime attacked based on the hope or assumption that they would strike very hard, take out key leaders. Remember, the regime, as they call it, they are controlled by the evil guards, right? And they suppress the population, as they say. So now they've taken out all the key guards, right? The regime's military leaders, And so it should be over. What happened? The exact opposite, as we knew would happen. If they had killed many more people, if they had succeeded in killing the leader and the heads of the heads of the three branches of government, it would still be the same. Iran would immediately have a new leader, a new president or acting president until we have elections, a head of judiciary, a head of the armed forces, a head of the speaker of parliament, and we would have continued. Iran is, first of all, a civilization. It is an ancient civilization. The Islamic Republic of Iran has very popular support. We saw that last Friday during the war, the Friday before this Friday, right? We had massive demonstrations across the country, including in Tehran, which I participated in support of the armed forces, in support of the current administration, in support of the Islamic Republic of Iran, under airstrikes. And then, of course, I'm sure you saw the funeral in Tehran.
Yes.
Now, the West doesn't want to show the funeral because the BBC reporter, she came in and she went into this side street where there weren't all that many people around her and gave her report, basically indirectly trying to say that it's not all that a big deal. The CNN reporter said thousands of people participated. It was in the millions, in 40 degrees temperature at noon. I'm not that old, but it was very difficult. I mean, I'm pretty old, but I'm not that old, but it was still pretty difficult for me. It was really tough just getting there, stuck in traffic, and then the heat and the crowd and the density of the crowd. That means power. That means strength. That means determination. What the Americans and the Israelis did was exactly what we thought they'd do. They brought the people together.
Yeah.
They actually showed that the Islamic Republic of Iran was correct in its skepticism of the West. So a lot of these young people who 3 years ago were involved in this color revolution and who thought that we're the stubborn ones and the West wants to solve the problem and we're being too tough and we're preventing normalization, and if we just normalize, Iran will be, I don't know, Switzerland. I don't know if Switzerland is all that great, but anyway, it probably
The
is.
chocolate.
But yeah, so now these young people see that they saw the reality. They saw that as Iran was negotiating, the West was conspiring. When the Zionist regime was bombing nuclear sites, which could hypothetically create contamination, radioactive contamination that would kill people, the West didn't care. They supported it. They were supportive of the airstrikes. Even the International Atomic Energy Agency refused to condemn it. This was an awakening. This was an awakening for many people in Iran, especially the youth. So the United States has created an environment in Iran where people today are more united than they've been since the 1980s, when Saddam Hussein invaded the country. And we knew this would happen. I mean, it was obvious for anyone who understood Iran. But the West, they create this propaganda. They hire these so-called Iran experts who will say what needs to be said to feed that wishful thinking in the West. And of course, they get funding, then they fund the politicians through the funding that they get, and this circle of wealth just continues, and the narrative continues. Western media says the same nonsense, but we always knew it would be the opposite. They were expecting Iran to collapse because they say the regime, as they say, is evil, it's unpopular, it's a house of cards, just one push and it's finished. Well, we saw that it was no push, it was the hardest punch that they could give. And ultimately, when the fighting began, the Iranians, how should I put it? They got the upper hand.
Yeah.
They got the upper hand. They turned the tide. And it was Netanyahu begging for relief. And Trump, when he saw Iran fire those missiles at at Doha, at his air base in Doha, 6 of those missiles hit their targets, by the way, not one or whatever the Western media likes to say. Western media will they're just sure. 6 missiles struck, and these are among the oldest missiles that Iran had, and they didn't even fire from those bases in the Persian Gulf region that are designed to protect Iran against the United States. They were fired from elsewhere. These were the sort of missiles that we fire at the Israeli regime, but older missiles. In other words, Iran wasn't even touching its capabilities. So Trump, I would assume Trump understood that. Maybe he did.
I don't know.
Maybe the people around him understood, because Trump, I think, is pretty well controlled by, from what we're hearing, by
Agreed.
his chief of staff and the head of the CIA and so on. But in any case, it doesn't really matter to us. What is important is that they wanted an end to this, and who punched last? Who beat the other side last? The last 2-3 hours, it was Iran striking targets across Israel, and Iran was firing the missiles that they were firing were getting through. So they can pretend all they want. The reality is, on the ground, when the fighting ended, there were celebrations in Iran. I didn't see any celebrations in Tel Aviv.
No. In fact, you get news stations in Israel admitting that much of the damage was not being shown, that the government was putting a restraint on what was being shown. I will be honest with you. I was very critical of Iran for negotiating with the U.S., but I'm realizing now that criticism might have been misplaced. I had a conversation with a woman that you put me in contact with, and I asked her, why would Iran negotiate with the United States? Basically, it's a monster at the door. Why would you negotiate with the monster? And she pointed out something that you just alluded to, that there are internal politics in Iran that demanded, on some level, it be shown that these are not legitimate negotiating partners. We will go through the negotiation. We will, if we can get a deal, we'll get a deal. We'll do all of that. But the fact that Iran was attacked has solidified political support around the government in a way that could have never been done if they hadn't gone through these negotiations for it to be shown that the U.S. and Israel weren't honest actors. Is that true? Is that fair as an assessment of what is taking place politically in Tehran right now?
I agree, absolutely. I would go even further. I'd say that it's also important for us, for our friends across the board, to see that we tried. We knew that they were going to attack. I think probably on your show, I said that I don't believe that there will ever be a war with the United States, in the sense that the United States would invade Iran and we'd have that. I continue to believe is just out of the question. The United States does not have that capability or the resources. They'd have to bring in maybe 1.5 million soldiers. It's just not possible. The world has changed. This is not the 1990s, and Iran is not Iraq.
Right.
And so that's out of the question. But as I said before, there is a possibility of conflict between Iran and the United States, let alone Iran and Israel. And that happened. But Iran believed that there was going to be war or conflict with the regime. But we didn't know when or exactly what time, but that was the general belief that conflict is approaching. And as we moved closer, it was the signal, they're bringing in their troops, or at least their air force. You saw people making comments online and elsewhere. It was becoming clear that we were getting close. However, Iran, if it hadn't negotiated, then the Americans could have said, in all this, and dishonestly, that we tried, but they wouldn't even talk. And then people, both inside Iran and outside, many would have said, well, if you had talked, maybe this could have been avoided.
Yeah.
So what Iran did was it negotiated, but Iran was smart. The leader from the very beginning said indirect negotiations, not direct. In other words, he didn't give Trump what he wanted. Trump wanted it to be in Abu Dhabi, in the Emirates, a completely obedient ally of Israel. Iran said Oman. Why? Because Iran wanted to say in Oman, in the country of Oman. Why? Because Iran wanted to show everyone that we will not do it the way the Americans want, but we will be at the negotiating table through indirect negotiations.
Right.
So as the negotiations were taking place, the Americans were conspiring against Iran. And that shattered the worldview of so many people inside Iran. People who just 3 years ago, as you know, who were participating in that color revolution in Iran, people would approach me, former students. They'd send messages. We were wrong. They'd contact friends. We were wrong. The
Wow.
leader was right. He was right all along not to trust these people. Because what happened 3 years ago with that color revolution, you know, women like freedom and that sort of thing, it was not about women like freedom or anything like that. It was about color revolution. And a lot of these young people thought we're being sanctioned and the government doesn't care. They are being stubborn. And so our lives could be so much better, but these people, they're obsessed with their hatred for the United States. And so they won't do a deal. That was the narrative. And that was something that these Persian language media outlets in the West were pushing, and there are the thousands of online foot soldiers that they have in Albania and elsewhere
Yeah.
that they were repeating. Well, that narrative collapsed because everyone saw, you know, wow, these guys were talking, they were conspiring. When they strike even nuclear centers, Europe is saying, yes, we support it.
Yes.
The IAEA won't condemn it. The United States is backing them up. So that whole narrative that has been constructed over years collapsed because Iran played smart. Iran didn't have to negotiate because they knew they'd fight. There would be probably an attack at some point anyway. But the smart thing to do is to have BRICS countries, politicians across the world, activists across the world see the reality. Iranians, young Iranians in particular, see the reality of the situation. That it's not Iran that's being irrational. If the United States behaved like a reasonable actor, this region would be completely different from what it is today.
Right.
It is the United States that is pursuing a policy in this region that is inhumane, barbaric, medieval, cruel. They're starving Palestinians and they're massacring them, massacring and starving them. As we speak, as you and I are speaking, it's continuing for 21 months.
Yeah.
And the BBC will try to, push, draw your attention elsewhere. CNN will try to draw your attention elsewhere. Through the demon. One thing that the Western media did that also created an awakening was that people saw the liberal media and the conservative media simultaneously pursuing the same anti-Iranian policy.
Yes.
So it wasn't so the New York Times, which hates Trump, or CNN, which hates Trump, or MSNBC, which hates Trump, when it comes to bombing Iran, they were saying the same thing as Fox News, perhaps less bombastic and attempting to be a bit more sophisticated, but in essence the same thing.
Yeah.
This wasn't unnoticed. People saw that, well, there's no real difference when it comes to Democrats and Republicans in aggression and murder and slaughter. So I believe that Iran emerged much stronger than before this attack, and political awareness across the country and outside of Iran also has grown. And another thing, Qatar, the Emirates, Saudis, sadly, the Erdogan regime in Turkey, they fund a lot of anti-resistance individuals, organizations, media outlets, and so on. And they're always trying to undermine the resistance. They always said Iran is not sincere, this is all fake, they're going to do a deal, or Hezbollah, they are not really fighting. And then when they did fight, they tried to show them as ineffective, always, disparaging and so on. Now, everything is clear to those who are not on the payroll of these oil and gas-rich regimes and others, who is behind the resistance. As we speak, all of these entities are cooperating with the US and the Israeli regime. Bannon, when he spoke about Netanyahu being saved by Trump, basically Bannon said that Iran won the war, that Trump saved the Israeli regime. In that same clip, he spoke of the role of Qatar helping the United States. The Qatar today is, very different from years ago, even though years ago it wasn't all that, they didn't do anything that could make them proud, but now Bannon says it, or Tucker Carlson recently said that the U.S. base in Doha is basically to protect Israel. That's what it's for.
It is.
So everything is becoming clear for those who want to be honest intellectually. I mean, obviously, someone who's on the payroll of the BBC or on the payroll of certain regional governments, they will never see the light, but or they don't want to. They'll keep their eyes closed. But everyone else knows what the axis of resistance is, who is honest in their defense of the Palestinian people, and who is dishonest. So I think that at multiple levels, even though we had damage, even though we had martyrs, even though, especially the first day was very tough. It was like a blitzkrieg. It was like the Nazis in the Second World War when they just suddenly carried out their attack. It was very painful. But Iran quickly regrouped, fought back, turned the tide, and won. That's it. Now, I don't think that the Israeli regime is going to stop, because this is a regime that has no red lines. Europe and the United States have no red lines, and the regime is violating the ceasefire in Lebanon every day. The Western guarantors of the ceasefire, as they say, they're all supporting it. We saw how they just threw the ceasefire in Gaza and into the bin, Trump and Netanyahu, and no consequences.
Ceasefires are tools. They're not tools for ceasefire. They're tools to pursue the war under different means. Yeah. And just
the only question, and by the way, just one thing I'd add, and I may have said this last time, that the only issue really that I've heard, the biggest criticism that I've heard in Iran is that why did the Iranians accept a halt in hostilities? But I think even that has a very strong logic to it. First of all, Iran wants to show its friends across the world that, look, we don't want a regional war. We don't want to destroy the global economy. We are the reasonable actors. Some may say, well, but now they're going to regroup and then they're going to strike again. We're not sitting here just lying around waiting. We are preparing to hit them much harder next time around. There's not a moment right now where the Iranian armed forces and the government are resting. They are preparing. Just as our enemies are preparing, we are preparing. But we have the world now behind us, and they've been exposed to the world for what they are. I mean, Jamal, an unknown performist in the UK says death not to Israel, death to the Israeli armed forces that's carrying out a Holocaust. Death to the armed force, death to an institution.
Yes.
A military institution, a genocidal, murderous, like the Nazi army.
It would be like the death to ISIS.
Because it's doing it in front of the global community. It's doing it in front of our eyes. It's not like, I don't know, the Holocaust where later on they show pictures, or, the years later people come out, or they're released from the concentration camps, and then you have a few black and white images or whatever. No, it's being done like right now when 30 people are slaughtered on the beach, you see it 20 minutes later. Yeah. And you see the numbers rise in minutes. Like they say 20 people were murdered, then it's 25, then it's 30. We're seeing it live. So they want to launch an inquiry about this guy because he said death to the people who are carrying out this Holocaust. But no one is even thinking about sanctioning the Israeli regime. This is something that is exposing these monsters both at home and abroad. And when he chanted, uh, uh, death to the IDF, death to the IDF. I don't know if I'm going to get your thing into trouble.
No,
If
you're
it is, I'll
fine. The
just say,
crowd was into it.
I don't
The
want,
crowd applauded.
I don't want to, I don't, yeah, I don't want, when he said it, I didn't say it. Okay.
Yeah.
So when he said it, when that guy, you saw the crowd chant.
Yeah, they applauded. And by the way, it
The
spread.
crowd was chanting.
It spread to
Yeah.
Canada, I think. It spread to,
Yes, of
I think,
course.
one of the
Yeah.
other countries.
But what I'm saying is that, across the world is sympathetic to Iran. And after each chapter, the axis of resistance, Iran, Hezbollah, Ansarullah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, all of these actors are more and more popular. They're vindicated further. And the West and the Israeli regime, they're drowning in the filth that they've,
Yeah.
in the filth that they've created for themselves.
I want to get to something. By the way, you're right. The BBC had hundreds of people who complained that they felt like they were press secretaries for Israel's genocide. So that there's that. So there are people who feel chained, like stuck within a system that don't allow them to criticize genocide for what it is, being genocide. The other thing to this is, and I'm glad you mentioned this idea of Iran is not just sitting back and waiting. Yes, there was a lot of questions about why Iran stopped. My assumption was that Iran stopped because the United States got involved in making it clear of basically my proxy needs a ceasefire, that my proxy is getting beaten up more than we thought it would. I strongly suspect that Donald Trump thought that Israel could overthrow the government of Iran. And within the first 48 hours, they found out, okay, this is not true. And by day 12, it's like, okay, Israel is taking too much damage. We need to effectively stop. So I agree with you. Daddy came in to save Israel in this case. Speaking about not sitting back.
But just one thing I'd like to add.
Wait, real quick. I want to ask this.
Netanyahu wanted the ceasefire too.
Yes, he was begging for it.
And Trump. Both of them wanted it.
Well, they needed it to stop. Israel couldn't keep going in the way it was going. Analysts have come to the conclusion that Iran has two options, and I want to get your take on this, either the Libyan model or the North Korean model. And from the Libyan model, it's effectively not go the way of nuclear weapons and effectively get pecked at over the course of years. Or the North Korean model, where build up conventional military, build up an air force, proper air defense, alliances with regional actors, and build your own nuclear deterrent, especially if you don't want, let's say, Russia or China to give some kind of nuclear umbrella where you want to be an independent actor in this. Give me your take on this. Does Iran feel that it's stuck with those two options, either North Korean model or Libyan model, or does it see a different pathway?
No, I think it's fair to say that this is the Islamic Republic of Iran's model. And that is what's making it attractive now across the world. Remember, the antagonism towards Iran is unprecedented. You have the entire West, not 1 month, 2 months, but for 45, 46, 47 years, telling people how sinister, evil, corrupt, nasty, irrational, barbaric, medieval, reactionary, dangerous Iran is, right? And then you have these regional regimes that are in the American camp through their oil and gas wealth, promoting Wahhabism and Salafism, the very same Islam that the CIA wants. And so we're the ones being called medieval and evil and so on, but the West, the United States and its regional proxies and allies are creating that very same ideology and promoting it across the region and across the world.
Right.
And using it for their purposes. Like, for example, the people who were carrying out attacks in Iran during the Israeli regime strike, these were people who were cultivated by the regime and definitely Western intelligence agencies and then handed over to the regime, who were Wahhabi, who were Takfiri, who were ISIS, and Al-Qaeda, many of them, not all of them, but some were just mercenaries and so on. But many of them were from these very same groups that were created by these oil and gas dictatorships, the groups that were used in Syria, that were used in Iraq, that were used in Chechnya, that were used in Libya, They were used in Libya. They were funded in Libya before going to Istanbul to redirect their focus on Syria. They overthrew the Libyan government.
Mhm.
So all those narratives that were created by the West and their regional proxies that were racist, sectarian, full of religious hatred, both in the media and also through their cultural institutions that have oil and gas wealth behind them, that has basically collapsed. Now you see people across the world looking to Iran as the last hope.
Professor, I agree with
And
you
the
on that.
West is
But the last hope in the context of remaining intact, and in remaining intact, there's a question of, okay, because look, level with me on this. Iran just decided to what people will call the worst of both worlds. What they mean by that is, obviously, you're a sovereign country. You can do whatever you want. That's my point of view. Obviously, the United States has no right to have any conversation with Iran about things that are pertinent to Iran, especially in regards to their nuclear development. But Iran decided, okay, we're going to go 60%, but we're not going for a nuclear weapon, which seems odd. It's like, okay, so you don't want the nuclear weapon, but you're going to enrich to 60%. Now, argument can be made that that's being done in order to, as a negotiating tactic, but I suspect part of it too is there's division in the country on where to go with this. Whether it's, do we go for a nuke or do we not go for a nuke? And you would have people who say, yes, we should. And people, I saw a one,
okay. Let's leave it there for 1 second.
please.
This doesn't mean you can also interpret this as the best of both worlds, not the worst of both.
Please.
Iran, first of all, within the framework of international law, has a peaceful nuclear program.
Mm-hmm.
It has a power plant, and it's building more power plants, so it needs nuclear energy.
Yes.
It has a experimental reactor, which is used for medicine, for industry, for agriculture. So it needs uranium at 20%. It has enriched uranium at 60%, which is legitimate. It can enrich uranium at 99.99%, and it will still be in accordance with international law,
Yes.
as long as it's not deviated towards military usage.
Professor, just
But
so you're
Iran
clear where I
did it.
am, I think you should have built the bomb.
I get that.
Okay.
I get what you're going to. But let me just point. Iran made that 60% and said, you don't want us to have 60%? Remove the sanctions. Remove the sanctions. Stop killing people. Stop strangling people.
Yeah.
So what did the United States? They bombed Iran's installations. We're now hearing that it's not clear if anything happened. Forget the fact that Iran has scientists, Iran has the industrial infrastructure to build more centrifuges and nuclear sites. It's all indigenous.
Right.
But also, Iran now has the legitimate concern for Western attacks on Iran's nuclear sites. So it says the International Atomic Energy Agency, you're out. So who is the loser? Iran has enrichment capabilities. It's unclear if the United States, how much damage has been done to Fordo. And remember, the 3 sites are not industrial sites.
Right.
They haven't, it's not like as if billions of dollars were lost. These are sites for Iran to learn how to enrich. Because at the moment, for the experimental reactor, we use smaller quantities of enriched uranium. For the nuclear power plant, we are using fuel that the Russians are providing. But we need to know how to enrich, because if tomorrow the Americans block us from importing nuclear energy, then we have an electricity crisis.
Right.
So Iran has to know how to do it. Just like in all Iran, what Russia you see today, everyone is talking about how Russian is industrialized. It's becoming industrialized because of the sanctions. That's what Iran has been doing for 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
So most of what I purchase in Iran when I go to a shop or most of the things that we buy are made in Iran. They may not always be the best quality, but they serve the purpose. And so Iran has an industrial base. Iran and it does so because of the sanctions. It tries to be as independent as possible so that it is less vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right? So now Iran has the ability to enrich uranium. It has enriched uranium. It has, according to US intelligence agencies, sites that are functional, that function, but it also has the ability to be ambiguous about its program.
That's fair. Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. Like I said, my point of view and the point
And we
of view,
didn't do it. They made us do it.
yes. And look,
We
like I said,
didn't tell the IAEA to leave a month ago. If we did, then you would have heard people across the world saying Iran is being provocative. And even though it would still have been an unjustified aggression, an act of war, a murderous and unjustified, unprovoked act of war, but the Western media, which justifies a Holocaust,
yes.
they would have justified it and many people would have believed it, including some young Iranians, people across the region, across the world, and of course in the West. But what they've done is that they've shown themselves as an aggressor, and they have basically pushed us to kick out the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Yeah.
And no one can complain about it. They can nag and grumble and and say that's not fair or that's not right, but they can't complain about it because they bombed our installations, and the International Atomic Energy Agency refused to condemn it.
Not just
We know
refused to
that
condemn
the
it. Grossi
agency
was
carrying
part
out.
of it. Grossi was like a spy.
Of
He was feeding
course.
information to the
Remember,
Americans and Israelis. Yeah.
just use DeepSeek. Your viewers right now, just go to DeepSeek and say what countries are on the board of governors in the International Atomic Energy Agencies. I did that. 17 are European and North American out of 35.
Wow.
Then you have South Korea and Japan. That's 19. Finished. They get they're the ones in charge. Do you think they'll ever be objective about Iran? There were 20 votes against Iran out of 35. 19 of them are the Japanese, the Koreans, Europe, North America. The 20th was the chainsaw guy in Argentina. The rest of the world did not vote for this. China, Russia, Brazil, India, and so on. So, yeah, this agency and its boss, they're tools.
Yeah. I think it's worse than that. I mean, it's an agency that's supposed to be impartial. They were obviously, Grossi specifically, given information that got Iranian scientists murdered, and was feeding information in regards to their nuclear sites. That's...
Yeah, I mean, remember, and that's how all international bodies are. None of them are objective. Remember the OPCW. When the West and these oil and gas rich dictatorships in the region, which are bound to the West and NATO, when they were claiming that the Syrian government was gassing its own people, they sent a delegation, OPCW, to Syria. The technical experts went back and said, no, this doesn't add up. It wasn't done by the Syrian government. And it was clear it was carried out by ISIS and Al-Qaeda and those forces that were being funded through Turkey and Jordan by these dictatorships in the Persian Gulf region and NATO. So what happened in the OPCW? They kicked those guys out of the team, the guys who were writing the report. Anyone can look this up, and Aaron Matei has done a lot of work on this. People can go to the gray zone and see this. Other people have also done it, but that's where I checked some of the material on that website. So, and then they used that. They brought in these political hacks to write a report, the report that Washington wanted, and then they bombed Syria. And then what happened? Trump bombed Syria. And what happened? All those people who hated Trump, those who were saying Trump was Putin's puppet and that he was an agent for Russia, those very same people supported him. What was that guy? What's the guy's name? He
Brian
said
Williams.
Yes, exactly.
Brian Williams.
Guided by the beauty our missiles and so on.
Yep,
all these people,
missiles.
CNN, MSNBC, all of them were suddenly happy with Trump. He had suddenly become an American president.
And I think that's what he said, actually. He said this is the first time Trump has become an American president. Like, this is just astonishing.
Yeah.
Last question before I let you go. Where does Iran go next? There were reports that there were going to be purchases of Chinese fighter jets. There were reports about ships in the Sea of Hormuz apparently had mines. I don't know if that's true. That's coming out of Western media, so who the hell knows? But obviously, Israel and the U.S., Israel has never abided by ceasefire. They've lied every ceasefire. They've been used as tools for, continuation of war. And there was the previous gentleman that was running for Iranian president, Saeed Jalil. He makes this point. He says, those who speak of trap of war say nothing about a trap of diplomacy. A broad narrative is pushed. They want to drag you into a war. This is a trap. But what prevents conflict? What prevents threats? Your power, your timely response, your precise, correct response. That is what prevents escalation. And I think he's right. And as you pointed out, any attack by Israel this time around is going to have a worse response to it, I guess. But Iran, and give me your take on it, in its mind, is going with the notion that Israel is not going to maintain this quote unquote pause, and that there will be further provocations that they are going to continue with under this guise of a ceasefire.
I have no doubt that the regime will attack again. And I think once again, the West is going to be exposed in the eyes of the world as irrational, aggressive, brutal, barbaric, medieval, the very same things that they've always attributed to Iran. And sympathy and support for Iran will increase further.
Yes.
And global South countries will be more concerned about the West than before, because they'll see that the West just won't stop. But Iran is preparing itself. And Iran has not used most of its capabilities. The Israeli regime did everything it could. Iran is going to root out and find out and deal with these mercenaries that the Israeli regime has been using. ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Takfiri people who've been brainwashed for decades through oil and gas well, and who've been used in the Libyan theater, the Afghanistan theater, the Syrian theater, and elsewhere, and in Yemen too. They've been used against Ansarullah, the Yemeni government. Iran has its own technological capabilities. These missiles are all Iranian. These drones that are not talked about a lot, but a lot of Iran hit a lot of places in Israel with their drones.
Mm-hmm.
And Iran will prepare itself. I mean, whatever weapons they need, whatever capabilities, and they've learned a lot from this war, because the Israelis have shown what they have. And again, it was far more difficult for Iran than for the Russians, because Zelensky doesn't have any of the stuff that Netanyahu has. Both are part of the Western Empire. But one is obvious, and Zelensky is easily sacrificed for Netanyahu, as we saw.
They did. Yes,
so,
they did.
They dumped Ukraine for Tel Aviv. They dumped Ukraine for the Israeli regime.
Yep.
Overnight. So next time round, I think probably the regime will be more barbaric than before, but I think Iran will be decisive. Iran's response will be decisive.
Professor?
And if anyone tries to deal with Iran in the Persian Gulf, they'll find out Iran's capability is the hard way.
Professor, always appreciate it. Always appreciate it, man. You please be safe, and thank you for this. I really appreciate it. You have a good one, and I'm going to close this out. Be safe. Have a good night, okay?
You too.
All right. Let's see this, and this. Shout out to Professor MarandI, professor of, just to nail it down, Professor MarandI. He is professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran, and he is always appreciated on this